Hi, everybody. If you don't already know me, my name is Jeremy Baker. I am a sociology faculty member at both the University of New Mexico and Columbus State. Today, we are going to be talking about messaging choices and the extreme Christian right, a study of chick tracts. So, I'll be addressing Christian fundamentalism. I'll be addressing some ways that they attempt to get their message across and a couple other general sociological concepts around religion. And you can find this and some more information at my website, profjeremybaker.com. So the way this is going to be laid out is first I'm going to give you some background on the chick tracts. Then I'll talk about my methods of research I used in looking into this. Then we will look at findings and conclusions. So before we really get into it, we need to talk about how sociologists talk about religion. So we study tough topics like religion because we take the role of outside observers. We aren't fundamentally interested in whether the thing is tangibly accurate or not. We are interested in what people believe. So honestly, it's irrelevant to a sociologist regardless of what they believe, whether there is a God or there isn't a God, whether heaven or hell exist or whatever. What really matters to us is that people believe that the thing exists. So it is interesting to us that people believe that hell exists, is interesting to us that other people believe hell doesn't exist, is interesting to us that people are trying to attain nirvana. It is interesting to us that some people have no idea what nirvana is, etc., etc. So specifically in this presentation, we're going to be talking about the views held by Jack Chick, and these are very offensive views, and these are views that many Christians, that Jack Chick considers himself to be, many Christians also find these things offensive, but we need to look at these perspectives in order to understand our society better as a whole. So now let's talk about some of the background, some of what you need to know regarding Jack Chick. So the tracts themselves are compact comic books. If you are you familiar with that term tract, they are brief descriptions of ideologies, is one way they can be defined. These tracts have been translated in more than 100 languages. They are designed as a tool for Christian evangelism, and the Chick group considers themselves to be non-denominational Protestant Christians. Chick himself uh, identified as being independent Baptist. If I remember correctly, he considered himself Southern Baptist, but then he himself broke off from the Baptist Church. He was born in April 13th, 1924. He lived to the age of 90. He did die in 2016. He is an American publisher. That is a typo. He actually worked out of Ontario, California, which is where his primary publishing house is. The first Chick tract was published in 1971, and the Chick group, Chick LLC, also has published full-length books, DVDs, and full-length comic books. They are a fully functioning publishing house. And even though Chick died toward the end of 2016, it appears that the publishing house continues to be active. New tracks continue to be generated, which also indicates that chat for a while probably Chick was not the only one producing these things. All of the comic strips have his name on them as the author, but the reality of the fact is that he probably has had quite a bit of help for quite some time. So these tracts are relevant. This isn't just a trivial thing. The big reason why is that these tracts are widely used across evangelical groups and churches. There are probably millions of people in the United States that have had contact with these comic books, and they are believed to be an introduction to the belief structure of Christianity, and more specifically fundamentalist Christianity. And we want to study that because we want to look at the thing that that people believe is the best way, the most honest way, the most effective way to portray their religion, right? When you want to understand what people believe, one great way is to look at their the way they present themselves to the world, right? So this is the material that they feel is the most appealing to their religion. And another reason why we would study chick tracts is that the rhetorical style could be comparable to other social movement groups, such as other religions. So other Christians, other people of different religions. You could look at environmentalism with a similar mindset. I'll talk about that toward the end. And almost any group that is interested in recruiting new people to its cause, uh, it's interesting to look at uh, their material in this similar kind of way. So, the average chick tract has about 20 or so pages, and on each page there are 1 to 2 cells. So if you think about a comic strip, each little square, that is a cell, and each cell there are about 2 cells on the average chick tract page. The categories have quite a range. It does talk about abortion, drugs and alcohol, homosexuality. Um, it addresses Catholicism and Islam. These are actually both central to the message of Chick, even though the majority of his work doesn't directly address Catholicism or Islam. Chick is actually very staunchly anti-Catholic and very staunchly anti-Islamic, among other things. I address that in a different presentation, also available on my website, where I look into Chick's conspiracy theory, but this particular uh, presentation will be talking about his hope and fear messaging. But yeah, he talks about Freemasonry. He talks about Bible stories. One more notable thing on this slide, he also on the website, and I say he, I should be saying they, because this is a publishing group at this point, publishing material. Chick is dead. Chick died in 2016. They identify their top 10 bestsellers on their website. You will notice that 3 of those bestsellers are Bible stories. One of those bestsellers is a Halloween tract, and 6 of those bestsellers are what he calls basic gospel. And that is important because um, because I found a slight difference in the way the top 10 bestsellers portray themselves versus all of the other ones. So let's talk a little bit more about methods. I use what's called content analysis. This is a social science method of close reading to find deeper patterns in a text or series of texts. Within content analysis, the researcher looks for elements of interest, including phrases, topics, words, images, and stuff like that. And then we catalog those images for either qualitative or quantitative content analysis. I once had someone say, "So you're just reading them?" Well, yeah, but it's a lot more than that. It's reading them and then rereading them and then looking at them and re-looking at them and finding patterns that way. It's more than just reading. One concept I think is very helpful is what's called Swidler's Cultural Toolbox. Swidler published this in an article of the same name in 1986. She stated that culture is a set of tools by which we use to understand our world and spread our worldviews. So we look at this and we think, okay, we're looking at Christians, we're looking at fundamentalist Christians, evangelical Christians. What are in their toolbox? Well, I've observed, at least within Chick's portrayal, that there are two general categories of tools in his toolbox that he uses to show people his message. He has either hope tools or fear tools. His hope tools are that of many Christians, that God or Jesus loves you, that your sins are forgiven, that if you do these things, it'll lead to a good life. And his fear tools are threats of hell, his stating that mankind is inherently sinful, that if you don't follow the way he believes, you are going to suffer tremendously. And of interest to me going into this was figuring out which does he use more? Is there a comparison? Are there any patterns? So I broke down each frame. I looked at each individual frame in each of the 256 Chick tracts, and I broke them into one of five categories. One being very hopeful, two being hopeful, three being neutral, four being fearful, and five being very fearful. And I'll talk in the following slides on how I calibrated that. It was more than just me saying, well, this is a very scary slide. This is not so scary. I looked for individual things in that regard. So, what does it mean to be very hopeful? Well, I stated that if the title mentioned Jesus forgiving sins of humanity, I think that's a pretty hopeful message. If the cell, I'm sorry, this should say cell and not titles. I'm looking about individual cells of the strips. If the cell mentions God creating the earth or the universe, that's, presuming that God is a benevolent God. That's a pretty hopeful statement. And the character's praying for salvation. So Chick believed that the individual desiring a to be saved, that was the most hopeful thing possible. So I think that's probably a one in his book. So we see here two examples of ones. Uh, to many Christians, the crucifixion is a hopeful, it's the centerpiece, right? It's the centerpiece of a lot of Christianity, is that Jesus gave his life so that all of us could live better lives and our souls could be saved. And this image is very, very hopeful to Chick and people who believe the way he did. Jesus opened the doors to heaven. That's a pretty hopeful thing. And then similarly, we see an image of salvation. The one guy saying, your sins are forgiven. God's Holy Spirit enters you, making you a new creature. Will you believe in Jesus, Bob? Yes, yes, I will. And he did. Again, another very hopeful kind of image. These two cells, so these are what I would call somewhat hopeful. These are cells that you see nice things happening in, but not necessarily the greatest thing ever. This is a cell in which the character provides a good example to another character, in which a character expresses a belief in Jesus because that is what Chick is trying to do. And the title mentions something good about people of another faith or nationality. That was relatively rare, actually, of happening, but every once in a while, Chick would say something nice about people of another faith or nationality, and that was usually a hopeful moment. You'll see here two examples of twos. Now, regardless of your relationship with the LGBT community, Chick probably, if you're watching this presentation, Chick probably has a different uh, interpretation of what it means to be gay. Chick sees homosexuality as being terrible and the most horrifying thing ever, and he thinks the best thing you can do is to protest that and to be brave against the cops who, you know, unwaveringly fall on the side of gay people, which is kind of ridiculous to think that that would be the case. But he sees that image as being a positive one in the upper left-hand corner. And then in the lower right-hand corner, you see this character leading prayer with people that don't necessarily know how to pray. And he sees that, again, as a positive thing to do. These are both twos. A three cell was one in which a character made a neutral statement, something like one character saying to another character, I'm going to go make a sandwich, or something like that. Just, there's no hope or fear implicit in the thing. And oftentimes these cells are setting up other frames. So if that one character goes to make a sandwich and then on their way to the kitchen they slip and fall and die, right? Even if the character is dying in the next slide, the going to make the sandwich slide is a three. So we see examples of this. So in the first slide in the upper left, we see a secretary picking up and someone asking to speak with an attorney, and then the secretary tells them to hold. And then in the next slide, we see what would be a four, right? So the first slide is a three, neutral. The second slide is a four, or a fearful slide, because Mr. Shyster is being a jerk, right? And we also see in the lower left-hand corner another three. You're going to inherit your daddy's house. He's gone for good. Yes, he passed away last month. I'm very sorry. This is a setup for another four slide in which the individual in the foreground uh, exhibits some bad behavior. These are both very good examples of what I'm talking about with setup slides. Number four is somewhat fearful. So bad things are happening, but not the worst thing possible. So a character provides a negative example by behaving badly. So a character is swearing, a character is stealing, a character is bullying, something like that. A character expresses a disbelief in Jesus or God, or a lack of respect for religion. That is for behavior. Something bad generally happens, or something frightening happens in the tract, like a car accident or somebody gets shot. Those are fours. And then the spread of a non-Christian religion is also somewhat fearful, because obviously Chick does not want that to come out too much. And the spreaders of non-Christian religions are portrayed in a sinister way in the Chick tracts. And it is important to note again, Catholicism, according to Chick's perspective, is non-Christian. So spreading of Catholicism would fall under a 4 as well. So here we see two examples of fours. Here we see a young man who has gotten into his parents' money and is stealing the money and loving the money, right? That is negative behavior in that particular comic strip. And then we see the 4 from the 3, remember, in the previous example, with inheriting daddy's house. This is the next slide. We're sorry, it was a heart attack. Nope, they hung him last year for killing some people. Stay away from us. We don't like people either. this uh, gruff, kind of negative, nasty behavior, callous for a loss of a father, and that father having been a murderer. That is 4 behavior. And then 5 behavior is a 5 cell is very fearful. The character goes to hell, right? That's about the worst thing you can imagine. A reference to hell, or other synonyms such as lake of fire or the pit or something like that, by a character who believes, that is very fearful. A character dying or being threatened with death, God punishing another character or group. So a rain of fire coming down from the heavens. This happens in some of the tracks. That is 5 material. And pointing out that Allah is not God or that another faith is false. Pointing out that someone else's faith is bad, that you believe the wrong things, that is very fearful in this context. Remember, we're not talking that it's bad to point that stuff out. We're talking about, from Chick's perspective, him pointing out that, um, you know, your belief structure is incorrect. You're going to go to hell because you believe this thing. That's what he's talking about. And here we have some fire and brimstone images that embody the 5 structure. Uh, Satan wants everyone to fry in hell. You're going to stay here in the abyss for eternity, Timmy. These are both 5s. So, now that we've gone through that semi-Likert scale, let's look at the findings. So, we see some patterns in the hope to fear structure. We see some rhetorical structure, and we do see some overarching themes. So we see, just to simplify it, that 31% of Chick's cells are hopeful, that 62% of his tracks, of his cells, remember those individual squares in the comics, are fearful. So we see an overwhelming number of the cells being about fear out of the total 5,203 cells. So if we look at this in a pie chart, it is another visual way of interpreting the data, and you see that fear is almost double that of hope in Chick's work. But it is interesting to look at the top 10 bestsellers. This is the stuff that they're saying sells the most. So it is important to compare this to the general body. And you'll notice a 6% difference, right, in the hope messages, right? It definitely appears that the bestsellers are more hopeful. Not overwhelmingly different, right? But there's a difference, and there's a real difference, and that speaks to what people want out of Chick, right? Maybe they want the hopeful stuff. Maybe they don't want as much of the fire and brimstone stuff. So that illustrates the difference between what's being produced by Chick and what is being consumed by the churches. So, and I personally see that as being a hopeful thing for our neighbors that maybe go to, or are members of religious organizations that, have different perspectives than maybe we might have. Here, this is a composite rhetorical breakdown. This is what your average Chick track might look like. So the first 2 cells, the first page, would be pretty neutral, and then you get hit with something, a 4-level bad thing happening, and then after that bad thing happens, something neutral happens again, and then something good happens. So maybe One sets up the situation where people are driving down the road and then they crash, and then a Christian in the green zone, 11 to 13, comes and helps them. But maybe in 16 through 25, the people refuse the Christian's help. And then in 26 through 32, that's the real bad stuff, so they die and go to hell. Again, it's that level of melodrama. And then in 33 through 36, maybe somebody doesn't die of the group, and they say, I am interested in Jesus. And then 37 and 38, the person might be accepting Jesus. And then um, at the end, in almost every single one of the tracks, are these instructions on how to go to heaven yourself. So there are like a literal like 4-step instructions on how to go to heaven, because Chick again believes in salvation via accepting Jesus. So he believes that follow these 4 steps and you go to heaven, and that's always included at the end of the Chick tracks. So the themes. Uh, there were mainstream Christian themes within the Chick tracts, namely that Jesus Christ is the only way to salvation. As people that live in the United States and the rest of the Western world, where you don't necessarily have to be a Christian to be familiar with that message, whether you believe it or not. Another theme that is at least mainstream within Christian fundamentalism is that all humanity is damned to hell, especially homosexuals, non-Christians, non-repentant sinners. Again, those are mainstream fundamentalist beliefs. And then in Chick's works, we also see specialized themes. Other people might call these different things, but within Chick's work, we see anti-Catholic themes, we see conspiratorial themes, and we see anti-Muslim themes. And again, in a different presentation, will cover this also in my work. You can find that on my website. And among these other themes are what he calls Satan's 2,000-year conspiracy. Bohrer, in a article called Drawing Religious Battle Lines, he went over this pretty well. And to sum up this big block of text, you can also download the slides on my website if you like to really digest this a little better. Satan's been out to get us from the very beginning. Satan created the Catholic Church. Satan created Islam. Satan is getting ready to kill us all in the Battle of Armageddon. This is Chick's conspiracy. That sounds pretty simplistic, but actually it's incredibly complex. It's very, very complex. You could easily make one of those serial killer dioramas where you're taking yarn and pins in kind of a classic sleuth movie kind of way. And it's very, very complex in your classic conspiracy theory way. And we see fragments of this cosmology, or what I call Chick's mythos, in multiple Chick tracks. You find them in the Doom Cookie, which is one of his more infamous tracks. You find it in Last Generation. You find it in many others of the Chick tracks. So future research will be completing a cataloging of all tracks. I have done that this time. That's a little bit old of a bullet point. More advanced statistical analysis would be helpful, probably. It would also probably be helpful to compare Chick's messaging with more mainline publications. So Cokesbury through the Presbyterian Church. No, Cokesbury is Methodist. The Westminster John Knox publications, that is Presbyterian. Concordia. These are all publishing groups that are Christian, that I would suspect have different framing methods than Chick would. And also, it would be interesting to look at secular groups with similar visions, i.e. similar visions that bad things are going to happen if you don't follow the message of our particular group. So you could look at environmentalists and their concern for the environment. You could look at anti-war groups. You could also look at hate groups such as neo-Nazis or the Ku Klux Klan or groups like that, and look at maybe are those groups using fear as much as Chick is using fear, and compare them. And some interesting things may be findable there. So that is it for this presentation. If you have any questions about this, please don't hesitate to contact me. Contact information is available on my website.